Since the inception of radio and television, Cleveland has been one of the top markets in broadcasting in the United States. Over the last 100 years of broadcasting history, Cleveland's contribution to both radio and television has been profound. Cleveland was at the forefront of a variety of popular broadcasting formats, and had its share of celebrities that made their start in the city, along with a variety of icons that made a lasting mark on the Northeast Ohio community. In this episode of the Icons of Northeast Ohio, we will look at the history of broadcasting in Cleveland, both radio and television, and its impact to the area and to America overall. But before we begin, if you like this video, please subscribe to our channel, and please click the notification icon, so you can be notified of future videos like this one. Broadcasting in Cleveland started in 1921, with the beginning of the first amateur radio station, started by Warren Cox in his Payne Avenue home. The first call letters he used were 8ACS. This very early radio station was just a hobby made for members of the New Cleveland Radio Association. The radio station played concerts a couple of nights a week, and was listened to by a small but growing audience of consumers who had this new type of technology in their homes. In February 1922, the Department of Commerce made it unlawful for any amateur radio stations to broadcast any information without a license to do so. So Cox immediately applied for a license for his radio station, and soon after 8ACS became WHK. He was assigned a radio frequency of 1420 kilocycles. He then got a new location to set up his radio station in the rear room of the Radiovox store on Euclid Avenue in downtown Cleveland, and then aired the new radio station for the first time on March 5, 1922. From that moment on, broadcast radio was born in Cleveland. Later in 1922, WJAX began broadcasting, and in 1923, a third radio station took to the airwaves, WTAM. WTAM bought WJAX in 1927, and had the largest frequency of the new radio stations, but because radio stations were basically in their infancy, there was not a lot of programming at first. Just a few shows or concerts at first, a few nights a week. It wasn't until 1927 when the radio station WJAY got its first sun-up to sundown license, that people in the city could now listen to the radio for more hours in the day. The 1920s saw a boom of entertainment options in the city of Cleveland. Throughout downtown Cleveland, and up to East 105th Street, several palatial theaters were built. These incredible theaters featured vaudevillian shows and the latest Hollywood films. Popular restaurants and hotels in the area provided social dancing during dinner, and also right after the shows that played at these beautiful theaters. The new radio stations made their mark during this time as well. They began to broadcast from these restaurants and from hotel dining rooms, and by doing this, they all built a real audience following. These audiences looked forward to hearing concerts and shows that were played at hotels and theaters such as the Cleveland Hotel, the Rainbow Room at the Hotel Winton, the State Theater, the Hotel Statler and the Hollenden Hotel. For the audiences that listened to these broadcasts, it was exciting to be part of the action, even if they were unable to get dressed up and go to these fancy locations to be a part of the fun happening downtown. By 1926, radio was no longer a novelty that was enjoyed only by a few lucky individuals. By this point, nearly every household in the region had a radio. And because so many more people were listening, the radio stations in the Northeast Ohio area had to up their game by getting more advertisers, and this, then, brought in more listeners. Radio purists thought this was a sellout, as they felt radio should only be used for educational purposes. But none of the local radio stations saw their purpose is to be just a format for education. They began to partner with larger radio stations in New York City, and these partnerships formed larger radio networks. In September 1926, the Radio Corporation of America formed the National Broadcasting Company, or as it soon became known, as NBC. Then in 1928, a second rival network was purchased by William Paley and was named the Columbia Broadcasting System, or better known as CBS. NBC had two networks, a red network and a blue network. In Cleveland, WTAM became affiliated with the red network, and WGAR, which debuted in 1930, became the blue network affiliate. CBS chose WHK to be its Cleveland affiliate. In the 1930s, both the larger networks, along with some of the popular local stations, began creating new and vibrant content to appeal to every kind of audience. This new content included quiz shows, children's serials like The Lone Ranger and Little Orphan Annie, variety shows starring established Hollywood stars such as Rudy Vallee, Bing Crosby, Al Jolson and Bob Hope. And there were also these new daytime dramas, that would quickly be known as soap operas. These popular new dramas appealed broadly to housewives who listened intently to them, while they did their daily, repetitive chores. Some of the first big local programs were shows like Ethel and Ben, that played regularly on WGAR. And Mildred and Gloria, a popular woman's show, that was broadcast on WTAM. And an improvisational drama show called Just Married, that played weekly on WJAY. In the 1930s, sports broadcasting began to take off in radio. Tom Manning became the area's first and best-known sports announcer. He did his play-by-play of the Cleveland Indians at their games at League Park. In fact, in 1937, WHK broadcast the first Cleveland Indians baseball game. Other popular sports broadcasters of Cleveland radio included Jack Graney, Jimmy Dudley, Ken Coleman, Bob Neal, and later Gib Shanley, Joe Tate and Nev Chandler. Radio was also a real blessing for the Cleveland Orchestra, which began playing weekly concerts on the local Cleveland radio stations starting on November 10, 1922. Their Thursday evening concerts were very popular. They were only the second orchestra to play on the radio, Detroit being the first, as they preceded Cleveland by only a couple of months. But the Cleveland Orchestra's broadcasts were heard each week by people as far away as Maine, Florida, Minnesota and Canada. Then in 1924 the Cleveland Orchestra made its first recording, playing Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture. These weekly broadcasts created such a fan base throughout the country, that they then put on a broadcast of 9 concerts on the radio station WTAM in 1926, that were performed from the Masonic Hall near downtown Cleveland. The concerts were sponsored by the Sandusky Cement Company, and listeners at home could acquire program booklets that they could either pick up from WTAM, or have the radio station mailed to them before each broadcast. The Cleveland Orchestra was also the first orchestra to play concerts on the radio specifically for children, which was also broadcast by WTAM. These broadcasts were intended to be used for music appreciation classes for both city and rural schools throughout the area. When Severance Hall was built in 1931, it was designed with radio broadcasting in mind. In fact, it was said that at the time, Severance Hall was the only music hall in the world, in which a radio studio had been built, with the purpose of broadcasting concerts from the orchestra. The original radio control room at Severance Hall was a completely insulated broadcast studio that accommodated 125 musicians, and served as the site for concerts broadcast directly from Severance Hall. Later, live concerts were broadcast directly from the stage of the concert hall. The Cleveland Orchestra's radio broadcast soon got a national following, when their concerts were played over the NBC network airwaves in the 1930s, and then over the CBS networks in the 1940s and 1950s. The broadcasts had a special significance during World War II, as in the early 1940s, the Cleveland Orchestra's concerts were heard at over 100 radio stations in the United States alone, and also were heard in Canada, Central and South America, and also throughout Europe. It was determined that during wartime, the Cleveland Orchestra's concerts had around 4 to 6 million listeners worldwide. In fact, Winston Churchill's wife was one of the orchestra's most enthusiastic admirers. The orchestra received hundreds of letters, telegrams and postcards during this time. Many of these were from soldiers fighting overseas. After the war, the Cleveland Orchestra's concerts continued to increase in popularity. By 1957, the orchestra's concerts were heard by more than 200 CBS radio stations from coast to coast. From 1965 to today, these concerts are mainly played through the radio station, WCLV, and is syndicated throughout the world. But radio is what made the Cleveland Orchestra one of the finest and most popular orchestras in the world. It was the thing that cemented the orchestra's reputation of excellence. This reputation remains intact to this day. On December 17, 1947, a new type of entertainment made its debut in Cleveland, when WEWS put on its first broadcast on a new technology that was known as television. This first broadcast was the annual Christmas show that was performed at the Cleveland Public Auditorium. This new television station was owned by the Scripps Howard newspaper chain. Scripps Howard also owned the Cleveland Press. The call letters WEWS came from the founder of the press, Edward Willis Scripps. NBC then began broadcasting their first Cleveland television broadcast, on the television station WBNK, on Channel 4 on Halloween night, 1948. Their first broadcast was a network show, Television Playhouse, which was filmed and televised first in New York City. A few days after that first Halloween broadcast, WBNK then televised the Truman-Dewey election results. In 1952, after some frequency reallocations, WBNK moved to Channel 3, where they remain to this day. In 1955, the Westinghouse Company agreed to trade with NBC for a few of their radio and television stations in both Cleveland and Philadelphia. But from the start, there were many issues with how the trade went down, and very soon after it was completed, Westinghouse was very unhappy with the deal. The FCC and the Department of Justice got involved in the trade transaction, and made the determination that NBC had extorted and coerced Westinghouse into the trade deal. The investigation into the trade deal lasted 8 years, and in 1964, the FCC ordered the trade to be reversed. NBC resumed control of the Cleveland radio and television stations, and in 1965 they changed the NBC station call letters from WBNK to WKYC. The third television station to sign on in Cleveland was WXEL. They started their first broadcast on December 19, 1949. At first, WXEL was a secondary provider of ABC programs, sharing these programs with WEWS. WXEL also carried a number of CBS programs that WEWS would not put on the air. WXEL also carried programs with the Paramount Television Network, where they aired programs like Hollywood Wrestling, Bandstand Review, and the show, Time for Beanie. In 1954, WXEL was sold to Stora Broadcasting, and they began exclusively showing only CBS network shows. In April 15, 1956, they changed their call letters to WJW-TV8. This was to complement their radio station WJW Radio. They moved their headquarters from their Playhouse Square location on Euclid Avenue, to their building on South Marginal Road, where the station remains today. In 1994, WJW-TV switched from CBS to Fox programming. WOIO then took on the CBS programming. Over the last 100 years, Cleveland radio and television had a plethora of celebrities. Some of these celebrities started their careers here, and became even bigger elsewhere, and others excelled exclusively in the Cleveland market, becoming icons in Northeast Ohio broadcasting. And here are just a few of those celebrities. Alan Freed started his illustrious career as a popular disc jockey on Akron's WAKR. He left Akron for WJW Radio Cleveland, where he began playing rhythm and blues albums for a younger, hipper, mixed-race audience. He coined the term rock and roll as a way of explaining the music, and held the first rock concert ever at the Cleveland Arena on March 21, 1952. The concert was called the Moondog Coronation Ball, which WJW Radio partnered with Alan Freed and other sponsors to put on for the fans of this new kind of music. But the crowd was so big for that first concert that they had to abruptly cancel it after the fire authorities shut the venue down, citing it as a fire hazard. Freed went on the air on WJW the next day to apologize to his audience for that abrupt cancellation. But that only increased the enthusiasm for the music. And from Freed's Cleveland radio broadcast, rock and roll was born, setting the world ablaze with this new style of popular music. Casey Kasem started his career at WJW Radio in 1959, a few years after Alan Freed left the station for New York City. He billed himself as Casey at the mic, using comedy, trivia and teasers on his popular daily show. It was in Cleveland that he began using his famous sign-off.
My name's Casey Kasem, reminding you to keep your feet in the ground and keep reaching for the stars.
Casey Kasem eventually left Cleveland Broadcasting to become the host of America's Top 40 Countdown. He would also be known as the voice of the character Shaggy on the Scooby-Doo series cartoons. Tommy Edwards was a disc jockey at WERE during the 1950s. Edwards is credited as being one of the first DJs to play an Elvis Presley record on the Cleveland airwaves. He also brought Elvis to Cleveland for the first time, where Elvis played that first concert at the Circle Theater. WXE AM 1260 was known for its fast-talking disc jockeys. They were called the Supermen of Top 40. This group of high-strung radio personalities included Jack Armstrong, Dick the Wild Child Kemp, Mike Rianari, Larry the Duke Morrow, Lou King Kirby, and Billy Bass. In fact, Billy Bass had one of the most versatile careers in Cleveland radio. He was one of the first African-American DJs in Cleveland. He moved from WXE to launch a progressive rock radio station, as both a DJ and programmer at WMMS. Bass was also the person who coined the phrase, Cleveland, the rock and roll capital of the world. He went from being a DJ, to managing the career of Grammy-winning R&B superstar, Luther Vandross. Victor Bleckman was also known as Uncle Vic. He had a very popular Sunday night show on WGCL, which lasted over 10 years. Besides being a popular DJ, Uncle Vic also released several novelty songs, the most popular and famous being Spaced Invaders, which went to number 64 on Billboard's Hot 100 in June 1980. When Joe Finnan came to Cleveland, he was both a DJ on KYW Radio, which would eventually become WTAM, and he was a weatherman on KYW-TV, which would become WKYC. Finnan was caught up in the payola scandal of the late 1950s. He admitted to taking cash payments and accepting gifts to play records. He left Cleveland amid the scandal, and moved to Denver. But later he returned to Cleveland, to finish out his career, at WNIR. Pete Franklin is often considered one of the best-known sports talk radio hosts in Cleveland. He actually pioneered the sports talk format, that is still popular to this day. His show was on WERE-AM radio. His style was considered confrontational, with both fans and sports figures alike. His direct style was what made him quite a legend in Cleveland broadcasting. Robert Conrad was known in Cleveland broadcasting as the Dean of Cleveland Radio. Conrad co-founded Cleveland's classical music station WCLV-FM, which is now known as IdeaStream. Conrad was best known for his silky smooth delivery, his deep knowledge of classical music, and being the longtime voice of the Cleveland Orchestra radio broadcasts. On the other side, Cleveland radio broadcasting had its controversial figures as well. These included Gary D., who started his career at WEREAM, and moved to WHK as their morning show host. D particularly loved to confront local politicians, holding a long-time feud with Cleveland City Councilman George Forbes. D was also involved in a highly publicized domestic violence incident with his wife Liz Richards, who was a co-host on the popular morning show, The Morning Exchange. He was later fired from his job at WWE for excessive use of foul language. Mike Trevisano worked at WTAM Radio for several years as a conservative talk show host. He was oftentimes controversial with his opinions. He started as a frequent caller to the Pete Franklin Sports Show, and was eventually given his own talk show, which became quite popular, quite fast. Mike was given the nickname of Mr. Know-It-All, which was seen by some with affection, and by others with animosity. Don Imus was the nation's original and most notorious shock jock. He had 2 stints in Cleveland. The first was in 1970 at WGAR, which lasted barely a year, but it was still quite a year. In that year, he shot to #1 in the ratings, as he peppered the airwaves with a seemingly drunken flurry of sexually and politically provocative material. He left for New York, and shot to stardom, using the same on-air shtick he had used in Cleveland. Only, the behavior that made him popular in Cleveland, had ultimately got him fired in New York. He then moved back to Cleveland, where he worked as the afternoon drive host at WHK. This was the same radio station where the more vile, Gary D., worked his controversial show in the mornings. Their equally reproachable personalities complemented each other, as both shows hit the airwaves on the most listened-to spots during the day, thus making WHK one of the more controversial and popular radio stations in Cleveland of that time. Imus eventually moved back to New York, and created the Imus in the Morning media empire. His show went into syndication, where he was able to gain even more popularity from his controversial, and often offensive behavior. He influenced quite a number of shock jocks and pundits that liked his style. Many who overwhelm the airwaves to this day, with similar types of shows. WMMS, also known as the Buzzard, was widely regarded as one of the most influential rock stations in the entire nation. The station started out in the late 1940s, as WHK-FM, playing mostly top 40 music. Then in September 1970, they adopted a new progressive rock format. Under the leadership of Billy Bass, and program director Denny Sanders, WMMS helped break many new rock artists nationally, including David Bowie, who kicked off his first US tour in Cleveland. They also helped play a key role in breaking several major acts in the US, such as Rush, Roxy Music, Bruce Springsteen, Southside Johnny, Fleetwood Mac, Meat Loaf, The Pretenders, Lou Reed, Mott the Hoople, and Boston. They hosted many concerts at the Agora Ballroom, a few of whom were released into albums, such as Bruce Springsteen's live concert in 1978. They also hosted the World Series of Rock, and was a big influence in getting the Rock Hall to Cleveland. In the 1980s, as their music format changed a bit, they gave more airtime to artists like Michael Jackson, Madonna and Prince. For 9 straight years from 1979 to 1987, WMMS was named Rolling Stone magazine's Radio Station of the Year. In the 1990s, WMMS started playing alternative rock, such as Nirvana, The Offspring and 9 Inch Nails, and then the station switched the format to active rock, always remaining ahead of the curve for a long time, in rock broadcasting. From its inception, Cleveland television, like Cleveland radio, was the starting point for many celebrities and icons that made their start in the area. And the Northeast Ohio airwaves had quite a number of very popular local shows. Here are just a few. Ernie Anderson was one of the best-known personalities from Cleveland television broadcasting. He created the on-air personality of Ghoulardi, a persona he created for the show Shock Theater, which played on WJW-TV8 from 1963 to 1968. He was considered the hippest horror host, wearing a white lab coat, a fake wig and a beatnik beard. He mocked the horror movies that he showed on air, and included edgy humor that made him quite popular with his fans. He had quite an influence on a whole generation of Northeast Ohio youth, some that created the punk bands like Devo and the Dead Boys. Anderson left Cleveland for Los Angeles, at first working with the Carol Burnett Show, and then becoming the voice of the ABC network as an announcer for many of their popular television shows. He was also the original announcer of America's Funniest Videos. His son Paul Thomas Anderson went on to direct the award-winning Boogie Nights. Tim Conway was a native Clevelander, who after his discharge from the Army, in the 1950s, went to work with Ernie Anderson first at KYW-TV, and then at WJW-TV. He wrote comedy sketches for Anderson's morning show. He even performed a comedy album with Anderson. In 1962, Conway and Anderson were fired from KYW, for misleading the station into believing that they had more experience with directing a program, than they actually had. Conway then followed Anderson to WJW-TV, collaborating with him on The Gouladi Show, where they continued to make sketches together. He was discovered by the actress, Rose Marie, who worked on The Dick Van Dyke Show. She took him under her wing and helped his career. He moved to New York City where he got a regular spot on The Steve Allen Show. He then got a gig working on the popular television show, McHale's Navy. But his career really took off when he became a regular on the Carol Burnett Show, creating popular characters such as the Oldest Man and Mr. Tudball, and being the one cast member on the show that had a knack for making the other cast members, such as Harvey Korman, crack up laughing on screen. Big Chuck Schodowski became Ernie Anderson's sidekick after Tim Conway left for New York. In the 1970s, he started the popular show Big Chuck and Houlihan, with Bob Houlihan Wells on WJW-TV, using the same kind of outrageous skits, and showing the same B-movies that were popularized on The Gouladi Show.
Now, Houlihan and Big Chuck proudly present the Certain Ethnic $6 Man.
When Houlihan left the show a few years later, he was replaced by a new sidekick, Little John Rinaldi. The Big Chuck and Lil Jon Show was a popular weekend night staple, from 1979 to 2007. Dorothy Fuldheim was one of the best-loved, and most prestigious Cleveland broadcasters. She started her career hosting a biography program, on WTAM radio. She then moved to ABC Radio, where she became their first female radio announcer. Scripps Howard approached her with the idea of getting her into journalism, by working for the Cleveland Press. Even though she was not experienced in the field, she started traveling the world during World War II, conducting rare interviews with Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler. She began her television career late in life at WEWS Channel 5, working for the channel before it even started its first on-air broadcast. She worked in the news department. She became the first woman in the country to have her own television news program. She interviewed many famous and prominent individuals, such as Martin Luther King Jr., Helen Keller, the Duke of Windsor and Barbara Walters. In fact, she helped to make television news accessible to women, like Barbara Walters, Diane Sawyer and Katie Couric. She became so famous for her broadcasting work, that she was a frequent guest on The Tonight Show, with Johnny Carson. She also attended big events such as the wedding of Prince Charles and Diana Spencer, and also the funeral of Anwar Sadat of Egypt. Mike Douglas started his career as a staff singer at an Oklahoma radio station, and from there, sang with the Kay Kaiser Band. In the 1950s, he performed with doo-wop bands in Los Angeles, and then in 1961 he arrived in Cleveland, and started an afternoon talk show on KYW-TV. The local program was called The Mike Douglas Show, and within 2 years it became so popular that it gained syndication, going on 5 Westinghouse stations. It was at first broadcast live in Cleveland, later moving to Philadelphia after KYW-TV reverted back from being a Westinghouse station to once again an NBC affiliate. While broadcasting in Cleveland, Mike Douglas featured many new artists, and helped introduce soon-to-be superstars, such as Barbra Streisand and Aretha Franklin. His talk show stayed popular throughout his life. Soupy Sales started his career in Cleveland on a variety show called Soup's On, which played on WXEL, which became WJW-TV. In 1951, he moved to Detroit to start his show, Lunch with Soupy Sales, which elevated him to national fame. He was famous for his physical comedy, mainly for taking pies in the face. The Morning Exchange, which premiered in January 3, 1972, was created as an alternative to the usual morning news programs. It was originally called the Alan Douglas Morning Exchange, as Alan Douglas was the host, and Don Webster was the show's announcer. Joel Rose read the news, and Liz Richards, who replaced Don Webster, became a co-host and weather presenter. They were the first program to change the set from being a formal news-style desk set, to one that included couches, resembling a suburban living room, with the intention of making the audience feel more relaxed. Because of this new kind of atmosphere, the hosts had a better and more engaging chemistry, and the show became very popular in Cleveland. In fact, it was said that 1/3 of the households in the northeastern Ohio area tuned in every morning to watch the Morning Exchange. The format was so popular and influential that it became the template for the show, Good Morning America. Ironically, Good Morning America was the reason that the show Morning Exchange had an eventual decline. As Good Morning America gained popularity, the Morning Exchange lost viewers. Their last show aired on September 10, 1999. Don Webster came from Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. In the early 1960s, he started an American bandstand-style show in Hamilton. In 1964, WEWS-TV general manager Don Perris offered Webster his own local dance and music program, called The Big Five Show. The show became an instant success. It did so well that by 1966 it went into syndication, under the title Upbeat. The show was able to bring many popular musical artists of the 1960s to Cleveland to perform, and the program was in competition with the national show, American Bandstand. Artists would often come to the show to test out their materials on the Cleveland audience, before taking their act or their music nationwide. The show was cancelled in 1971, but Don Webster stayed on in Cleveland to become the weatherman for WEWS Channel 5 News. Along with his time as the weatherman, Webster also hosted other local shows such as The Morning Exchange, Bowling for Dollars, The Gene Carroll Show after Gene Carroll passed away, along with the Daily Ohio Lottery Picks and Academic Challenge. Gene Carroll was a name that sparks many great memories, especially during the early days of Cleveland broadcasting. He had 2 very popular shows, the first being Uncle Jake's House, and the latter being The Gene Carroll Show. Carroll started his career in radio at WTAM. His first popular show was Jake and Lena, which had many devoted listeners. The show got so much fan mail that it broke box office records at the Cleveland Palace Theater. He left for a time to work on the Fibber McGee and Molly program in New York City, but then came back to Cleveland in 1948 to start one of the earliest kids shows in the nation, called Uncle Jake's House. The show had quite a number of local fans, including Don Novello, who would eventually go on to play Father Guido Sarducci on Saturday Night Live, who remembered how much the show influenced his comedic style, as he watched it as a kid growing up in Cleveland. Also Bob Hope, who had a strong friendship with Carroll, and would appear on his programs over the years. Carroll later started the Giant Tiger Amateur Hour, which would eventually become the Gene Carroll Show. It was a Sunday afternoon staple, featuring many local artists, some who got their jump start on his show, such as Ben Orr from the Cars, Chrissie Hynde of the Pretenders, who had performed on the show with her first band Jack Rabbit, and singing artist Bobby Womack. Paul Wilcox hosted the popular show Polka Varieties. This long-running show played every Sunday and featured polka artists from all over. It went into syndication and was popular throughout the country. Frankie Yankovic was the show's original band leader, before he went on to national fame. Polka Varieties' popularity has made Cleveland the capital of polka music. Lynn Sheldon played the beloved character of Barnaby. The Barnaby Show aired on KYW from 1957 to 1967, and then it moved to Channel 43 from 1968 to 1990. The character of Barnaby started out as a pointy-eared elf that wore a straw hat and lived in an enchanted forest. Barnaby would mostly show cartoons like Popeye and Casper the Friendly Ghost. Barnaby's elf character evolved into a kindly older gentleman who kept the straw hat but wore an ascot, blue blaze and khaki pants. The enchanted forest also changed to Barnaby's cottage. The show was popular with both kids and parents alike. Barnaby ended all of his shows with his trademark phrase,
If anybody calls, tell them Barnaby said hello. Tell them I think that you are the nicest person in the whole world. Just to you. Just to you. Bye-bye.
Superhost was a character portrayed by TV personality Marty Sullivan, and was broadcast on WUAB Channel 43 from 1969 to 1989. He wore a baggy suit, cape and red nose, like a clown version of Superman, to host the station's Saturday afternoon monster movie. The show would begin at noon with Soups On, an hour-long warm-up to the movies, with a couple of Three Stooges shorts, and often a Laurel and Hardy short, as well. Superhost would appear during commercial breaks, cracking jokes, showing skits, and talking to the TV audience. Superhost greeted fans with his famous Hello Dare, and followed this with sketches like The Moronic Woman, a parody of The Bionic Woman, Caboose Soup, a Boxcar Willie Takeoff, and Fat Whitman, a spoof of Slim Whitman. His most famous sketch was a music video, based on the popular trucker song, Convoy. He was also known for referring to the movies as flicks, as in, Let's Get Back to Da Flick. Marty Sullivan also worked as a station announcer, and later would be a fill-in on the prize movie that also played daily on WUAB. Mr. Jingling, another local childhood favorite, is the keeper of the keys to Santa's workshop. He was a holiday tradition in Cleveland, Ohio. Mr. Jingling was originally sponsored by the local department store, Halle's. He served as the store's Christmas season spokesman on television, and also acted as Santa's representative in the store. Mr. Jingling became the keeper of the keys as a reward for saving Christmas, when Santa lost the key to his treasure house of toys. Jingling saved the day by making a new key. Mr. Jingling eventually left Halle's and became a staple of the Higbee's department stores. During the Christmas holiday season, he would have short segments on WEWS-TV, telling stories related to Christmas, and to being the keeper of the keys. Mr. Jingling also had a very popular theme song.
Mr. Jingling, how you tingling, keeper of the keys. On Happy Summer, we'll be looking for you to turn the keys. He keeps rockers on the stack, a treasure house of toys, with wonderful fingers and a ring to all the girls and boys. Oh, Mr. Jingling, how you tingling, keeper of the keys. On Happy Summer.
These television celebrities started their broadcast careers in Cleveland, and moved on to bigger careers in the national market. Al Roker was a very popular weatherman on WKYC from 1978 to 1983, before going on to the Today Show, gaining much fame there, and becoming a fixture on the show and on the NBC network. Gretchen Carlson was a reporter and anchor for WOIO. She went on to Fox News from her stint in Cleveland, where she starred on Fox and Friends. At Fox, she became involved in the sexual harassment scandals with Roger Ailes, being a major part of his eventual ousting at the network. Kelly O'Donnell was a Cleveland reporter and anchor at WJW in the 1990s. She moved to the national stage, becoming a political reporter for NBC News, seen often at the Capitol or the White House, and has even hosted Meet the Press a few times. Martin Savage started out as a reporter at WKYC, and then at WJW-TV. He moved onto the national stage as an anchor for CNN. His news show, the CNN Newsroom, earned him a Peabody Award for his work. Brian Ross started his career in Cleveland as an investigative reporter on WKYC. He moved to New York and joined the NBC network, becoming a super serious investigative reporter for the popular television show, Dateline. There have been many personalities that graced the airwaves on Cleveland broadcasting over the decades. Some are long gone, and some are still part of the television landscape of Northeast Ohio. See if you remember any of these Cleveland broadcasting personalities. Thank you for spending the time with us, remembering the icons of radio and television in Northeast Ohio. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit the like button, and please subscribe to our channel. Please watch some of our other videos, and tell your friends about them. Thanks again, and see you real soon.